Okay, so reviewing test number 1, and it only has 3 PowerPoints on it. So let's get to talking about those. So as a class, you guys, it helps. We won't fiddle about with the raising a hand things. Don't tell us the letter number. Don't say C. Say to know, for example. All right. We're kind of reinforcing the actual terminology when we do this then. So the word science comes from the Latin word sire, which means what, you guys? To know. Good job. And hopefully I colored in number C on my template, and hopefully you colored in number C on your template. Every so often I do color in the wrong dot. So again, let me know if I mark something wrong. That shouldn't be wrong. Nature of science, which is a tricky beast, tells us that there are no truths because why? Okay, yeah. So what is accepted as truth could change if something contrary is supported by experimental evidence, otherwise known as letter C. I know some of those might have been tempting, but we're in a science class. So. All right, none of these has the entire scientific method in it, but the one that is closest is what letter? In this case, we will say a letter. D, all right? You start with an idea, you read about it, you formulate a hypothesis, you conduct an experiment, and you advance your theory. Those are in the correct order. What step is missing here? The last one. Well, yeah, what would come after theory? That's a law, exactly. All right, these next couple are some of the new questions, and it sounds like I could have wrote a question of which step is missing from the previous question. That would have been a good question, I guess. All right, so number 4, the process of science, or the scientific method, is it very quick or is it a slow and thoughtful process? Yeah, I should get rid of laborious there. That's not a very positive term, but slow and thoughtful process. These questions came up during COVID. You guys may or may not have had a science class while that was going on, but we were literally living through the scientific method when that was going on, and the general public was getting very frustrated with the changing answers that came out on a weekly basis, seemingly, sometimes daily. The scientists out there listening to all this stuff are saying, oh my God, they can't do science this quick. Why are they even talking about it? And well, of course, we were forced to talk about it. They were forced to talk about it. You guys were living through the trial and error process that you don't see, okay? If it seemed haphazard, if it seemed unorganized, it wasn't. That's just the process of narrowing down and of figuring out what's right and what's not so right. It's not meant to be observed by the general public. And that was a big part of the chaos that was going on. And it takes time. So the scientific method, this should hopefully have been an easy one for you. Encourages or discourages new thoughts and ideas? Encourages. You at least know what you were supposed to put, right? And lastly, the nature of science states that, or is that what? Static and unchanging or dynamic and evolving? Dynamic and evolving, yeah. There's some 50-cent words out there, sorry. But yeah, dynamic and evolving. Static means unchanging. All right? You guys don't have radio dials that you could actually turn to static anymore. But listening to static, you wouldn't think it means unchanging. But it comes from stasis. All right, so that was it for the scientific method stuff. Again, I just felt having 2 or 3 questions after I rambled for almost an hour about it just didn't seem fitting. So I was trying to come up with some new questions. Did you guys mostly get 4, 5, and 6 correct? Okay, that was my intent. Okay, nothing wrong with having a couple easy questions. But all right, so moving on to the protons and neutrons stuff, I cautioned you that you had potentially 9 things to remember right off the bat. You had the 3 components, you had to know their charges, and you had to know where they lived, right? And in some way, shape, or form, we got through darn near all 9 of those things. We also had a few other vocabulary words thrown in for good measure. So this first question asks about the mass. Which 2 have significant mass? Yeah, protons and neutrons. Good. No significant mass? Electrons. Okay, something to know about me. Okay, about how I test. I know you've heard for the last 13 years, always read all the answers, and you're like, yeah, this is the right answer. I am one of those guys who sometimes will give you a couple right answers, and there will be a way to choose that. All right? Please read all the answers. In my case, it's because many of these questions evolved from fill-ins, all right? And which is I don't want to say a much better testing format, but nobody likes multiple guess, right? Multiple choice comes in because you guys want feedback quicker. So teachers are kind of, I don't want to say forced, but again, it's in our best interest to get you something that we can grade quickly, get it back in your hands so you get feedback better. So questions that were originally blank and blank both have significant mass. Turns into you choosing 2 questions, or 2 answers, I should say. I also, if you notice, a lot of the answers stay the same all the way through 3, 4, 5 questions. I quite frequently will use up all my answers. Sometimes, though, you might use an answer again later. But generally speaking, it's a process of elimination. It's kind of matching, but it's controlled. So don't use that as a golden rule, but keep that in the back of your mind. All right, of those guys, which ones live in the nucleus? Protons and neutrons, good. And where, even though it's not the next question, it'll be up here soon, or it should be. Did I skip it? No. And where do the electrons live? In a fuzzy little cloud outside. Yeah, they're just swarming around like mosquitoes. I wonder if I forgot that question. I don't see it. All right, now we're talking about periodic table stuff. On the periodic table, would it be helpful to write that in the question? On the periodic table? Just to clue you in that I'm looking for a bunch of math from you? Okay. What word indicates the total number of protons in an element? Atomic number. Okay, remember, atomic number counts the protons. Well, then what's atomic mass? Okay, the 2 that you guys just told me have measurable mass. All right. So we're just taking literally those questions and moving a step forward there. But we have a vocabulary word for the same idea, the same concept. When we have an atomic mass, which is again the sum of the protons and neutrons, that is more than twice the atomic number, I told you that was a general rule. If you have an atomic number of 5, you could probably expect the mass to be 10, and if you have a 20, you could expect it to be 40, and so on and so forth. But that's not always the case. When it isn't the case, what does it do to? What do you have more of? Protons, neutrons, electrons? Neutrons. All right? And that reason is because atomic number. If you change protons, it's not the same element. It's a different element. You cannot change the protons ever, ever, ever. And supposedly you could throw a whole herd of electrons in there and it won't change the mass in any significant way. It'll do really bad things to your charge, but we don't worry about that in here. Yeah, so there should have been another question in here about where the electrons live. Oh, well. Vocabulary word. A substance that cannot be broken down into other substances by ordinary chemical methods is which of those terms? An atom? element? Anybody else? Well, hopefully I put a little blue slash over the word number D. Yeah. Atom's the pieces part, the tiniest pieces part. Yeah, an element. Substance composed of two or more different elements is what? Compound. Good. Smallest unit of an element that retains the properties of the element. Atom. Smallest unit of the compound. What do we call that one, you guys? Molecule. Beautiful. All right, just a little bit here about elementary particles. Which of the following is not an elementary particle? Did I hear proton? I think I did. Yep, proton. Because protons are made of quarks. Neutrons are made of quarks. I could have showed either of those answers. But electrons are basic. And as we just said, quarks are basic. But that's for now. Again, it's science. Lord only knows. Your kids may be learning about quarklets or something. Who knows? Pieces parts to the pieces parts. How many years was it we thought that atoms were as small as you can get, right? So, you never know. So, this question came from a geology test. I admittedly could have tweaked it a little better for an environmental science class, but in the end, why did we spend your time reminding you about all these silly little details? All of the above, right? But my gist is, and I'll admit it's sort of holistic, back up and take a big picture view of things. In order to understand, why sulfur rain coming out of the clouds is bad, or why a particular element being found in your water is bad, or why we want to have oxygen in the air, you need to understand where it all came from, all right? And again, while the intricacies of how they work as you get smaller and smaller is left to other classes, it never hurts to remind you guys. So, all right. So any questions about protons, neutrons, and such? Okay. All right, so the history of environmentalism, chapter 2 in your book, otherwise known as environmental philosophy, where people want to conquer and exploit nature as quickly as possible. Frontier attitude, beautiful. Nature and all forms of life deserve respect for their own value. Intrinsic beauty. Biocentric, good. And the rational one of the three. Utilitarian. All right. I forgot not to mark. Anybody miss 22? I hope not. I don't even know what I did. I obviously colored something in. What did I do? I colored in D, and hopefully I didn't mark anybody wrong for 22. Come up and get a point if you did. It was kind of wink, wink, nudge, nudge. I hope you guessed the right damn answer kind of thing. But if you didn't, for whatever reason, we'll write it off to test stress. You laugh. In order to go to grad school, there's something called the GREs, graduate record exams. And there was a section on art. And I actually had to critique a black and white copy of who knows what painting it was, with multiple choice answers. I was appalled. I wasn't even an art major, and I was appalled. So some things just you cannot, because you could definitely argue for any of these, I think, So, all right, anywho. First national park. What year? Which 72? 19. Bzz. 18. Yeah. Yeah, we had national parks long time ago. But not 1772. We were still establishing states and stuff like that. Not a nation, let alone national parks.
We weren't even a nation yet.
They're working on it.
Having national parks.
Yeah. Which of the following was the first? Yeah, it was Yellowstone. Does that series have anything to do with nature, or is it you guys watching Yellowstone? I hear a lot of people are watching Yellowstone. Maybe not the youngins, but it's a dad show. Okay, I didn't see any looks from you guys. So I'm like, all right, I'll ask you about it. That I keep calling it Among Us. It's Last of Us. Those are two different things that my kids do. Too violent, but I am watching Last of Us. It's pretty interesting. But yeah, someone was telling me about Yellowstone, and I'm like, good for scenery, maybe. A dad show, I like that. It's funny. My wife would like it then if it's nice and calm, not a lot of violence. It'll be good. Which president? If it were 72, we'd be looking at. I didn't give him as an option here. We'd be looking at Nixon or something, if not Johnson. But what president established the parks? Roosevelt, yeah. Mr. Roosevelt. General Revision Act. How many of you, if you don't mind me asking, how many of you missed 26? This is another brand new question. See, one hand. A couple people still looking for it. 2 hands, 3 hands. Not a huge chunk. Okay. This was something I did talk about it. It was one of the first times we attempted to legislate some saving legislate some preservation. It didn't last too horribly long, but it was one of the first times we did try to do that. So it is important, and I will I'll put a bit more of an exclamation point on it when I'm talking next time. So yeah, this allowed the president the ability to establish forest reserves on federal land. I don't think it was too many years, if not months later, that they repealed it, and Roosevelt did a handful more acres, 100,000, a few more acres, million acres, and said, all right, it's done. So luckily, we had other things come along over the years that didn't exactly fulfill the same purpose, but did give nature a fighting chance. Antiquities Act was one of them, all right? And this is why we have so many battlefields preserved, because it marks historical things, as in our time period, as well as prehistorical and scientific. Read that as fossil. I am waiting for the opportunity to someone to argue that in favor of a mining site. We should preserve this as a mining site because it is of scientific value. We need our lithium to mine our batteries or something like that. Not mine our batteries, to make our batteries. But for right now, Antiquities Act is being used for the forces of good. Use without impairment clause. All right, what did the use without impairment clause do? A lot of stuff here, and I thought I came up with some fairly clever wrong answers. Like drinking and driving on federal lands, impairment, get it? No. The government, not the people, but the government, yeah. So the example we had in class was they needed to provide water, probably for agriculture, something very necessary. But in order to do that in this particular site, they had to fill up, we'll just say Dinosaur National Monument. I don't know which one it was in particular. And it would have flooded the entire canyon with 300 foot of water, thereby requiring anyone that wanted to do some research to, wear scuba equipment and so on and so forth. When they could have just moved the dam, 1 mile in the opposite direction or something like that, and it would have totally been fine. So it makes people stop and think. Yeah, any example. And it's not that, politicians get a bad name, and I'm not trying to knock them by any means. Many times it's not an intentional decision. We want to flood Dinosaur National Park. No, nobody said that. But they didn't think about it. Who cares about that? Somebody might have said that. But I know Reagan was famous for saying, I don't give a damn about those owls. So That'll live with him forever. But oftentimes it's not intentional, and this makes you stop and look and say, hey, what'll happen if we actually do this? And there's really nothing wrong with that. Again, that's probably something you practice in everyday life. Think about the consequences before you make an action. So that's use without impairment clause. Which of these people did not play a part in the conservational movement, as discussed in class? Donald Trump, D. Trump. I didn't know if you knew it was him. I just put a D there. You always got to throw that as discussed in class part in there because, again, you could probably make an argument for anything you want. But we didn't mention that one. EPA, when? 1970. Good. How many of you missed 31? Just a couple. Okay. So we have a smattering everywhere is what I'm starting to get out of this soliciting here. That, unfortunately, does happen. So the NEPA was the policy. And basically, it's very similar to the use without impairment clause in that it forces them to assess any potential problems that their action might have on the environment. It was a function of the EPA. That's why the similarity there, but it actually stands for something slightly different that has just jumped out of my head. But yeah, that's what the NEPA was. I removed the questions, long-standing questions that got missed a lot because it is kind of confusing about when the Clean Air Act was actually founded. Because you do have a slide in there that talks about a Clean Air Act in the 60s. I think it's 63 maybe. But the EPA was not in place to enforce it. Nothing was in place to enforce it. So it's not until they actually revise the Clean Air Act in the 70s, I think 70, and then again, there's a handful of revisions to it. And in my mind, those revisions were the Clean Air Act, but some of you who actually could photographic memorize the slides, you're like, no, it said 63. That's why I picked the 60s. So I just got rid of that question entirely. Why did we establish the Clean Air Act? What was the reason here? Establish national ambient air quality standards. Does that sound good? Yeah. Regulate stationary sources of pollution like factories. Yeah. How about those nasty diesel trucks driving around on the roads and school buses and all that stuff? Yeah, so all of those. All right. Again, if you stopped at the first right answer, and I don't know if that's what happened with those of you that might have got this one wrong or not, please read all the answers. I can't emphasize that enough. All right, so we talked about stationary sources. Barnyard flatulence, that is, believe it or not, cow farts are a huge, and pigs, a huge source of methane. Huge source. And again, that's something where the opposition to the restrictions put on some of the businesses are pointing out, why don't you do the same thing to agriculture? Well, you either got to put your farm in a dome or attach these weird little gas masks to the back of cows' asses, and that's certainly not going to work. So, there's only so much we can do. So barnyard, smokestacks, cars and trucks are all sources of air pollution. Oh, but we're talking about stationary, so not cars and trucks, sorry. So in this case, answer D, both A and B are good answers. And I apologize if you didn't know what flatulence was, and I wasn't here for you to come up and ask. Non-stationary, cars and trucks, good job. All right. President Nixon supported the Clean Water Act. No, he did not. He didn't have a bad enough reputation already. So he really felt he wanted to help it out.
Oh, that's 35, right?
Yeah. Did I do it wrong? Are we good?
Yeah, we're good.
All right. Clean Water Act helped ensure the integrity of water by, and then for reference, I helped you out here. Point means obvious, and non-point is much harder to identify. That's not exactly what point means, but from your point of view, your perspective, that's more helpful. So, regardless of what I'm going for here, here's a better question. Why is non-point? Why can't we regulate non-point?
Because you can't point to a non-point source of water pollution and say, this is causing water pollution, we should get rid of this or regulate this.
True. There's somebody over here.
Aren't they also harder to track down?
Well, that's the thing. It's as simple as, you changing the oil in your car and you look up the street, down the street, okay, nobody's out, you go down to the curb and dump it down the sewer. Or, Lord knows whatever else. They literally are, it can be average citizen. It doesn't just have to be the bad guys. It could be an auto shop. You can still bring it to a business level. But even humans, just normal citizens, can be run amok of this one. So they could really only regulate source point. Now they will fine you. You go, the police drive down the street and you're dumping oil in the sewer. You certainly will get a ticket, but it's not a function of the Clean Water Act. Generally speaking, have the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act helped? Yeah. Did I hear a no? Not enough. All right, based on the discussion in class, why do you think the condition of the earth becomes a political topic? All of the above, yeah. And again, I hate talking politics, especially, in a classroom environment. It's tough.
If you're living in America, sometimes you just have to talk politics.
Well, that is very true. But even more so, some topics in class, it legitimately is as black and white. I guess the government's been involved through all those slides, huh? Yeah. Well, I think what it boils, I did put a positive in here. Answer A. We need the help of the government to help regulate. So, that we do need them in there. I guess it's big business that's more the evil person in this equation, but
or just corruption, that's more the evil person.
But who's corrupting them? Who's corrupting the politicians, if that's what you believe?
Maybe they're corrupting each other, actually.
Maybe. And when was the first Earth Day? Nope. 70. What did I pick? We only had a few more. Yeah, you'd think it with the lovey-dovey hippie thing, but they didn't actually kick into the mid-60s. But 70 was height of your Crunchy Nutty and Woodsy the Owl, and that's all the guys I grew up with. I used to show, and I think just because it was such a cluster frick at the end of the semester here, not the semester, the end of the unit, these commercials where it was Woodsy the Owl, the Crying Indian, all that stuff was Smokey. Yeah, thank you, Smokey the Bear. They might even be on your site if you guys poked around, but I didn't direct you to them. Yeah, he was actually Italian. That's when some of the big hubbub came up afterwards. He wasn't even Native American. But man, that had an effect though, and that's the thing is it was the first time we really tried marketing, and it came in with a lot of the environmental organizations that were sprouting up at the time, and that's when I was a kid, that stuff was on Saturday morning cartoons, and so it really started to spawn a whole generation. When in the past it was just those handful of people writing books that you may or may not have written. It really became pop culture, for lack of a better word, for the first time then.